I'm Ruth Ezell. In September of 2017, the St. Louis University Library Associates bestowed its St. Louis Literary Award upon Canadian novelist, essayist, and poet Margaret Atwood. Prior to that awards program, we welcomed Atwood to the 9 Network studios for a conversation about her life and career, including the Emmy and Golden Globe award-winning adaptation of her 1984 novel, The Handmaid's Tale. But before we get to that, here's a glimpse into the childhood of little Peggy Atwood, who was born in 1939, and how it shaped her adulthood.
I was born in Ottawa, which is Canada's capital and the second coldest capital city in the world, the first one being in Mongolia. So it was Ottawa winters, lots of snow. But I was only ever there in the winters because in the spring, summer, and fall I was up in the Quebec woods without electricity or running water with my family, because my dad was a forest entomologist studying insects that eat trees. And therefore they eat the trees in the spring, the summer, and the fall, but they don't eat them in the winter. So in the winter he'd be writing up his research, and the rest of the time we'd be up in the woods. So very useful for understanding things like house building. My dad built the houses that we lived in, plumbing. I like plumbing.
You do your own plumbing?
I don't know, not the big stuff, but I understand plumbing. And therefore I understand when it's time to call the plumber. I understand when this is not a thing I can handle myself. So handheld tools, there were no power tools then, et cetera, et cetera. So grew up there, did a lot of fishing. So that's how I spent my early part of my childhood, and that's what it was like. It was very basic.
That way of life nurtured young Atwood's respect for the environment. Along with her older brother, she found amusement and a creative outlet with what was available.
It was comic books, the radio, very big. Radio was very big. And we couldn't get radio up in the north, of course, but I remember it from the winters. We could get Russian shortwave on the radio up there, for what that's worth. I did learn to read at a very early age because nobody would read me the funnies out of the newspaper. So if I wanted to read the funnies, I had to learn to read. And I had an older brother, and he was an early writer, and we used to draw our own comic books as well as reading comics. So I was an early drawer and writer of comic books.
And they gravitated toward science fiction.
We knew about spaceships, of course, because of Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
Flash Gordon and our book on planets. So a lot of our early writings took place on other planets, and if you have a planet that you can invent, you therefore get to make all the rules about it. That's one of the reasons people like to write sci-fi.
But once Atwood knew she wanted a career as a writer, she encountered some cultural barriers in Canada.
We're talking about my generation, a recently ex-colonial country that did not value the arts at that time. So to say you were going to be a writer, if anybody said they were going to be a writer, man or woman or anybody, the reaction would not be, you can't be a writer because. It would not be that. It would be, what? You want to be what? Oh no, nobody can do that. Like, nobody can do that. So the barrier to entry was not gender. It was nationality. And a number of people right before my generation went off to centers of culture, so New York, London, Paris. You could be a writer there. But Toronto, doubtful, very doubtful. So one of the things my generation did when we got into our early 20s, we started publishing companies. Because the reason you couldn't be a writer then there was that where would you publish? So that was it. You would have to go to one of the centers of culture and pretend to be English, American, or French. But it was very hard to stay in Canada and be what you were, what you actually were at that time. There had been ones before, but they had always published outside the country and then played it back in.
So did you have like a circle of writer friends then? Or a small,
all three of them.
All
A few more than that.
While Atwood is best known as a novelist, she's written more than a dozen books of poetry. In terms of poetry, did anyone influence you? Or?
Well, anyone and everyone. So sure, but particular people, not really. So I didn't have one model, I had 500 models.
Was there a book or a poem or whatever that made you realize once it was accepted, I can actually feed myself?
Oh, that's another whole question. Okay, the first hurdle would be I can actually get published.
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be a poem that I wrote in 1960 when I was 20. I got accepted. I changed my initials. Okay, so I used initials like T.S. Eliot, so I must have had some feeling that maybe I should disguise who I was. So feeding yourself was a whole other thing. And the question was, should I have a job in language, or will that, suck up all the language out of me and I won't have any left over for my deathless masterpieces that I'm going to write at night? Or should I get a job that has nothing to do with language? Mm-hmm. So I've had various jobs, mm-hmm. and one of them was in market research, which was fascinating at that time. And
it really does delve into the human mind and how it thinks and how to get people to want something they may not need.
Market research, and also how much people lie when they're answering questionnaires.
And why do they do that?
Because it's a personal relationship. They don't want you to think badly of them. It was the days of interpersonal interviews. You'd actually go knock on the door. So on the internet, it's possibly less likely, but in the days of door-to-door interviewing, and it was my job to structure the interviews. That's to make it so that if you answered yes to question A, you would then go to question C. People would actually be able to follow the plot with these things. So they would lie about things like how many bottles of beer do you drink a week? And we would structure the interviews accordingly. We would put an impossibly high number for number one, and nobody would pick that because nobody wanted to be the person who drank the most in the whole wide world. The number we were really looking for was number two.
And they were trying to second guess you, basically, or?
We were trying to second guess them. Yes, we were trying to find out how much they really drank, or in the case of the 32-page laxative questionnaire, I said, nobody is going to answer 32 pages about this. They're going to throw you out of the house after page 3. And they said, oh yes, but those who continue, those are our target market.
Oh my goodness. Did any of these individuals, because you were like right there with them, did any characters come out of these?
Of course, I got a whole novel out of that. It's called The Edible Woman.
1969's The Edible Woman, in which the protagonist believes her body and herself are separating, put Atwood on the literary map. Fast forward to The Handmaid's Tale, a dystopian novel in which the United States is replaced by a theocratic regime called the Republic of Gilead. Its dramatic adaptation is aired on a streaming service, as is the adaptation of Atwood's 1996 historical novel, Alias Grace. Streaming services are your best friend, and I'll leave it at that.
They sure are, and they're the best friend for novelists in general, because streaming services are allowing these novels that felt too squished in a 90-minute format, and which was why a lot of them weren't made, It allows them to have the length and depth that they require. So I'm very happy about them. Their ancestor is the British who were making Jane Eyre in the 70s, 80s, early 80s, I guess. So taking classic novels and making them into miniseries back then. And the difference now is that something like this can not only get on a streaming service, but it can have a continuation, which I'll be very interested to see how it comes out.
Well, congratulations on all the Emmys.
Yes, congratulations to the cast and crew and team. I was just sitting there, but they did terrifically well. So very pleasing for them, very happy for them. And I was, as we say, a consultant. But that doesn't mean anybody has to do what I say.
Isn't that tough?
What if they don't do what I say?
If they don't do what you prefer?
Oh, that hasn't happened yet. So far we haven't had any really big head-to-head clashes. But it would be tough and if it ever did happen. So we know from the book that Gilead didn't last. So how long did it last exactly?
We'll have to wait and see.
We'll have to wait and see.
Margaret Atwood, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you.